Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wisdom Seeker Live. Glad to have everyone joining us today. We're going to tackle a bit of a tough topic, and that's the topic of being greedy or behaving uh, with greed. And so we're going to dive into it. I hope that we can get some insight into it. I know that it has been interesting for me as I have really mulled this over and look forward to sharing and having time of hearing from everyone so that we can gain some new perspective, gain wisdom into this topic together because I think it's impacting us maybe more than we know. Good morning, Aaron. Glad to have you. Dr. Jesmond, glad to have you as well. As always, I like to give a little background about the view we take of what wisdom is on the Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. In Wisdom is a journey for us, and it starts with knowledge, and that knowledge is something that we can all gain by what we do and by how we take our time and learn it. Quite often, we get that in the um, through initially through our education system, but that's only the first step, and it is not the where we gain our power. It's the start of the process, and that process proceeds on through to understanding. And understanding is taking what we have learned, the facts, figures, information, and begin to apply it. And generally, that's done as part of our experience day to day with our lives, and figuring out how to use this knowledge in a way that hopefully helps us be better at who and what we are. And then the last step in the process is the key to the whole process, and that's to step from knowledge and understanding into wisdom. And wisdom, in purely generic terms, is seeing things from a much larger perspective, including seeing things, seeing ourselves, seeing our knowledge and our understanding outside of ourselves. And for those of us that have a spiritual bent, excuse me, we like to think of it in terms of being wise is seeing things through God's eyes so that we can truly live and act in accordance with our who we are or who we're designed to be, and how it impacts others, not just ourselves. And so that's how we think of wisdom here on the program. And and so thank you for joining us. Welcome, Eunice. Welcome, Gladstone. Glad to have you all with us. And this topic is a tough topic. It's a little bit uncomfortable even. And I know that as I really considered this, it has caused me to uh, do my own self evaluation as part of what I do, who I am. And so we will break it down a bit as I like to do generally when we introduce a new topic. I like to share some background information. And one is just looking at dictionary definition of the word. So we're talking about greed, which is the basis for being greedy. And the way it's defined in the dictionary is intense and selfish desire for something, especially wealth, power, or food. Okay. One of the things that I want us to note is that it's only partially about wealth or money. There's other elements to it. I think that, I know that our tendency culturally is to, when we start talking about greed or being greedy, is to think money. And the reason I'm confident in saying that is the other part I always do is like to bring up a look at visuals as we see them culturally in regards to greed. And what is really rather interesting is that when I looked up, and all I do is a Google search of things, and when I look it up, most everything we see visually in regards to greed or being greedy is identified in the form of money. And I think that's, I understand, because that's a way that it shows up a great deal. But I think we have to be careful not to limit our scope, because greed can take on other forms, as the definition indicates. Power, it can be about even things. And so hope we'll take a broader perspective than just thinking of it in terms of money. And I know the poll that I did, I think many of you have seen that poll, and results are rather interesting, but a number of people have looked at it only in terms of greed, only in terms of money. So I hope we can look beyond that, because I think as we approach it, we're about being wise. And as we approach being wise, we have to have a much bigger view of things. Welcome, Rosemary. Glad to have you here. Always appreciate you being around. Rosemary is one of our regulars. And also, Mary, glad to have you this morning. And Shrenik, glad to see you today. Appreciate you joining us again. So let's look at some comments from you all, because at the end of the day, this is not just about me doing a monologue. This is about us learning and growing together. And so let's see here. And we've got our usual challenge with this live stream that makes it interesting, that we have some people that show up on the stream as a LinkedIn user. So bear with me a minute. Adds a little bit of interesting challenge. And let's see here. Okay, I think this was Eunice's comment, having or showing a selfish desire for more than is needed. Yeah, definitely a good perspective. And I think the other piece related to your comment is that it's a selfish desire and more than needed. And it doesn't, to be greedy doesn't necessarily mean having to be extreme in it. I think that we miss the point that when we start thinking about greed and greediness, that we are looking at only cases where people are extreme, and that where we see people making decisions purely from a selfish standpoint in extreme cases. And I'm not sure that we should limit ourselves. As I was thinking about this, I considered the idea of failing and being a failure. Just because we fail sometimes doesn't automatically mean that we're a failure, but it does not change the fact that we make poor decisions and have failures in our life. So we can't just say that only failures fail, because it's not true. And to look at greedy as the extreme attitude and action is to be unwise in looking at it, because we don't necessarily have to be greedy in the strictest sense to have greed. As I looked at my own life, I started kind of evaluating and considering, what was in my life, and do I have tendencies towards having greed or allowing greed into my life? Um, so let's look at some more comments. Let's see. Again, I want to make sure that I attribute to the right people. Gladstone makes comment, I think knowing our ignorance is the first step to gaining wisdom. Normally, our ego resists this reflection. And that is such a key comment, Gladstone. I think that that as we look at this topic, we tend to want to not think of ourselves as greedy. And I get it, because the connotations that we have about being greedy are pretty nasty. Again, I go back to these pictures of what we think of as greedy, and these are not real complimentary views of greedy people. And so I get it. We don't want to be seen or thought of in that fashion, and I get that. But I don't know that just because we're not this typical caricature of greediness, that we are without greed. And I think that's where we really get into challenges. So want to again look at comments from you all, because I learn and we learn from each other. Shrinick says, in this difficult time, better to concentrate on deliverables while being busy into multitasking activities. I think the message there, Shrinick, that I'm getting from you is that we need to get focused off of ourselves and on to doing things for other people. If I've misread that, please correct me by all means. And let's see. Eunice shares, signs of greediness could be inability to empathize, lack of genuine interest in the ideas and feelings of others, and unwillingness to take personal responsibility for behavior and actions makes one very difficult person to be with. Eunice, you've really shared some good insights in that. Again, greed is, and being greedy is much bigger than just always trying to get money. It is beyond that, and it's defined, I believe, in its core by selfishness. Welcome, Karen. Glad to have you here. And Ravi, glad to have you here from India. But yeah, I think that greed is more of a symptom, and it's a symptom of being selfish and self-centered. And that can be even in terms of how we look at our results in our own lives. And I'll go into that a little deeper here in a moment, that we've got to look beyond just money and beyond extremes. Rosemary has a comment, says, I find it interesting that others are concerned about my outlook on life. I have just planted 2 tomato plants in a small garden. I look after where I live. Another resident was very concerned that others will steal the tomatoes and I'll miss out on the best of the crop. My response was, I know that the plants will produce far more than I can use, and that I want people to eat as much of the crop as they want to. The response was rather incredulous that I could actually want to share. I'm right there with you, Rosemary. I think we have a huge cultural problem in that we have become so self-centered that we miss opportunities. And I think and that based on the excuse me, this post that really kind of prompted my pursuing this further is one that talked about, I believe Joshua Miller in his post commented that we miss the silver linings because we are so busy or so expectant of gold. And I look, and that really struck me is, are we missing blessings? Are we missing wisdom? Are we missing opportunity because we are setting ourselves up with a mindset that if it's less than gold, that it's not worthy of us? And so we just really need to be mindful that not only does our greed and our choices to be greedy affect others, but I think it affects us as well, in that we miss much of what we have opportunity to have. Welcome, Gabe. Glad to have you with us, and I appreciate your shout out on LinkedIn as well, among posts on podcasts for today, live streams. So thank you for that. And thank you, Mary, for I know Mary has really done a big effort to promote the podcast today, and that a lot of people are viewing. And I'm still learning some about how the system counts viewers. I guess because I don't focus in on that, I don't think of it, because at the end of the day, I'm going to do as God's led me and share this time, whether it's to just one person or 1,000. So, but thank you, Mary. I really appreciate your effort. And so let's get back to some of the comments. Ravi comments, focus on becoming better internally is the key to remain in harmony with others. Greed to get your values more stronger is good for all. Yeah, it's an interesting comment about greed for to get our values stronger. And I even had some people comment that greed is can be a good thing. And I think that's where we get into terminology and connotations and so on. And I think that what you're talking about is just making it a priority and having a passion about our values. And again, boy, this thing is multi-tentacled. It can go a lot of ways, because for me, values in and of themselves should be based in character, and character generally is not selfishly based. But if we use the word greed in the sense of really desiring something, even good things, for the purpose of others, I can buy into it. My initial reaction was negative when people said, well, greed can be good, because of those connotations. Whether that's best or not remains to be seen, something that I'll have to learn and grow into. So yeah, it's desiring that character, though, is really important part of this. And a lack of character is part of the reason we end up behaving with greed. So let's see, go on to share another comment. Eunice says, from the wisdom point, it's a desire of material wealth that leads to idolatry. And yes, I think that part of the real problem with greed that we see culturally is that it leads us off to a wrong path. In fact, there is a often misquoted scripture, and that is that people say that money is the root of all evil. And that is a misstatement of the scripture that they're referring to, because that scripture says the love of money is the root of all evil. Money is just a tool, like many other tools. In my world, I use a lot of tools like screwdrivers and wrenches and things like that. They're neither good nor bad. They're just things, and how I use them determines their value, not the object itself. So I agree with you that, unfortunately, if we get greedy, the ultimate outcome is that it becomes a form of idolatry, and it becomes harmful, again, not just to those around us, but to us as well. So thank you for sharing that point. And that was Eunice. And excuse me. Let's see here. And then again, I apologize because um, uh, I have several of you that show up as LinkedIn users. This is Gladstone. A gracious heart knows that nobody has become poor by helping others. Um, yes, such truth in that, Gladstone, that and kind of an antidote, if you will, for greed is indeed giving and helping others and taking the focus off of ourself and using our talents, our time, our resources, yes, and our money to help others is a good antidote towards dealing with greed. Um, what we need to be careful, again, I think that our danger in this topic is we only think of greed in terms of, and let me go back to the picture that visuals that I had, and also basing it on what I saw in the poll I took. This is our limited view of greediness, but greediness comes in so in other ways. For example, I have to wonder. One of the things we struggle with in our culture is our health in terms of weight. And part of the problem that leads to being unhealthy in our weight is a greed over food. We want it. We want what we want as much as we want, as often as we want. That, to me, and just my opinion, is a form uh, of greed. And I think that we all need to consider it. And when I look at myself and consider my behaviors, and when someone doesn't behave up to my exact expectation and I react negatively, my question for myself is, am I showing greed? Greed that I should be treated a certain way, that I should be given a certain consideration. And so I know, again, topic has been a challenge for me. Robbie comments, greed and selfishness is good for health of all if you're really greedy and selfish for greater good. Again, an interesting use of the word greed, and it goes to intent. And if we are really passionate about um, uh, taking care of others and pursuing it with great passion, in some ways that could be considered a form of greed, but in a good sense. Again, I'm still wrestling a bit with that to try to get understanding. But I think the key is that, and one of you indicated earlier, it's about where's our intent and where are we in terms of being aware of what we're doing, and are we doing it for the right reason? I think that it might even suggest that good things done for the wrong reason can create a problem for us. And Dr. Jessamine mentions the happy to be proud. And that's another term that's really interesting because we talk about culturally being proud of what we do and taking pride in what we do. And generally speaking, that is something that is a good thing to do because it means that we are investing ourselves and trying to be the best we can. But pride, in and of itself, also can be a real detriment to us and those around us. So it's a challenging topic. And by the way, I know some people are tired of polls on LinkedIn, and I don't know that I've ever shared on the podcast that the reason I do those is because of bettering communication and understanding. And I apologize. Welcome, Pankaj. I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. If not, please correct me. Welcome from India. But anyway, I think at least for me, my intent in using the polls on LinkedIn is to cause us to have a little more discussion, cause us to challenge our communication so that we can find some common ground and so that we can gain some wisdom from each other in the process. Just as a little aside that I wanted to share with you. And Dr. Jesmond shares a comment, says, without having proper wisdom, we healthcare people are invalid. And Dr. Jesmond, of course, is a healthcare worker and invested a lot in trying to help us see insights and understanding. And so I appreciate that, Dr. Jesmond. And I think that goes to all of us, that we invalidate ourselves if we approach life and behave without wisdom, because without wisdom, the danger is we make foolish choices that are harmful to us and others. And quite often, without wisdom, we make selfish choices because we don't consider how our choices impact others, not just ourselves. So, like I said, this topic's a tough one because it gets to some core issues that we have personally and culturally that can be very uncomfortable. And Ravi shares a comment: wisdom actually becomes negative if there is a lot of superiority over others. We should remember we all are just social animals in the vast universe. Do good and move on. I can see where you would comment about wisdom in that fashion, because having wisdom, in fact, one of the things that I recently did is added a hashtag on my LinkedIn profile, hashtag wise counselor. And I had to take pause in adding that because I didn't want to come across like you talk about, Ravi, as seeming superior, because that is not my view of me at all. In fact, the older I get, the more wisdom I gain, the more I realize how much I need to learn and how I am definitely not superior to anyone else at all. It helps me begin to realize that, save the grace of God, I could be like the worst person in our culture, in our society. So I get it. We just have, the key is we have to be mindful. Welcome, Zaid. Glad to have you on board. And appreciate your always being with us. And so moving on ahead, Dr. Jesmond comments: practical utilization of wisdom, attitude in each and every step of our profession. Yes. And I think that is a wise consideration for all of us, is that as we become wise and begin to approach all we do in wisdom, it makes a huge difference, including I think it will help us to see the question about greed. Greed is, again, from pictures we see, we have such a powerful connotation with it, but there is so much more to it. And in the post that I put up, it talks about the idea of the 7 signs of greediness. And those signs indicate we're dealing in greed. Excuse me. And it doesn't always mean that we're doing mean, horrible, selfish acts in terms of traditional sense. It just means we are not looking at things wisely, and we are looking at them from a selfish standpoint. Welcome, Tom. Glad to have you. Tom is a friend locally, and glad to see him. We go back a long time, so welcome. Glad to have you joining us, Tom. Look forward to hearing your thoughts as well. So Aaron asks a question: what do you think of times when we want to be more and do more for others, if we're not satisfied with staying at the same level, is that greed? Good question, Aaron, because that helps us begin to sort priorities and sort our intents, our motivation. And I think that even, and to answer your question, no, I don't think that is a form of greed in terms of being selfish. I think that is part of fulfilling part of our design. So I don't see it, but one of the things we have to be careful of, and I have found myself in this place, and that is our desire to do more for others is great. It is very admirable. But I have even come to understand we get to a point where we have such a desire to give and to help and bless others that we lose sight of something. And that is that others want to bless us. And it's almost sounds crazy, but we get in a form of pride that we are so willing to help others, yet we don't want to allow others to help and bless us. And I think that is a bad place. I think that is just as selfish as not trying to help anyone, because at the end of the day, if we approach receiving with not the proper balance, we are indeed becoming greedy in that we, in a usually unconscious way, want to receive all the blessings, but we choose not to let others be blessed. So I hope I've answered your question. I don't think that I don't see a lot of people getting extreme about doing good for others, but we do have to be careful and be wise, because it is possible to go in a wrong direction and get out of balance in that regard. Zaid comments, good morning, Kevin. Think I'm, okay. So glad that we had YouTube. For those of you who don't know, we broadcast on YouTube and Facebook as well. So if you have others that might want to join from other platforms, please invite them. And I'll even share a link in the comments after we go off the air as to how to find them on YouTube and Facebook. Rosemary comments in regards to food. A study just released here in Australia states that 1 in 6 children in the calendar year 2020 went to bed hungry due to a lack of food. Australia is a first world country where food should never be in short supply for anyone. So, yes, our, again, greed can show up in different ways, to a point that rather than eating what we need and then sharing the extra, I think it demonstrates an attitude of greed. It's not such a large or notable thing quite often, but it is still a concern in our culture. And I think that is kind of the hideous nature of greed and how it hides out. Let's see here. Pankaj has a comment, says, willingness to open up for work will uplift the business. On the customers, and views and comments will always differ over time. Employees lose faith with small companies, as small companies cannot pay them in large scale. When they quit, small companies struggle back for goodwill with customers, and customers pay the same amount to other business organizations for same products and service. We need to work together at one place to ensure there's enough working resource to take it looks like got cut off. Again, I think what you're getting to, Pankaj, is that we need to get away from the idea of being self-centered. When the more we are away from self-centered, the more beneficial it is to us and to our culture. And let's see, Eunice asked the question, does greed cause pain? I believe indeed it does. I believe that it causes others pain for sure. We recognize that, but I think we miss the pain that the greed causes us. Because if we treat things or approach things from greed, we're never satisfied. And to go around always unsatisfied looking for the next something is, and for me anyway, is a painful place to live. Because if we are greedy and only want it a certain way or a certain amount or whatever, and when we don't get it, we're not happy, we're not satisfied, that's pretty painful. Just a thought. Good question, by the way. Tom says, interesting that I didn't have to be taught to be greedy. I didn't know how bad it was until I tried to be good. I do what I don't want to do. Tom, you have hit on a principle that a lot of us need to catch, is that the influence of our lost condition and our propensity as humans, unfortunately, to do the selfish and wrong things, sinful things, rather than naturally doing good things. And it is a real problem that many of us overlook. And it is one of the essentials in dealing with any of all of this, including character, is learning how to overcome the problem that we have a propensity to be selfish and greedy. Robbie comments, greed can cause a lot of pain. I agree. Robbie, I see that you've got to move on to other parts of your day. Thanks for coming by. And so let's see here. Again, I apologize looking at a different screen. I'm trying to improve things so that I don't have to do that, but one day we'll get there. And Zaid comments, greed equals corruption, and anything corrupt is painful. I agree. We lose sight of the fact that corruption is painful because of its result. And Rosemary, I understand. Thanks for being here. Rosemary, for those who don't know, this podcast starts for her because of daylight saving times and different things. She's actually getting started at 11 p.m. her time. So thanks for making the effort. Hopefully, it won't be too long before the time zones shift again, and it make it a little less painful because we'll be starting at 10 for your time. So thank you, Rosemary. Blessings to you. And then Mary asked a question. How can people change the thought patterns from idolizing their money? It is a sickness. Well, and again, thanks for the question, Mary. I know we have some different perspectives, but for me, the solution for me, and the dilemma Tom mentioned, has been started in the form of a spiritual rebirth on my part, so that I take steps by faith to overcome my tendency to behave poorly, selfishly. And for me, that was a first step. In fact, it occurred to me that here in the next couple of weeks will be the 49th anniversary for me in regards to that decision and the change that it's made in my life. And as Tom talked about, overcoming my natural bent to be selfish and to do things poorly, wrongly, sinfully. That to me is the key. However we approach it, we've got to move beyond self-centeredness and move beyond looking at our world and ourselves only in light of our world and ourselves. And frankly, part of that is about wisdom, going from knowledge and understanding and living knowledge and understanding to a point of wisdom. The key difference is seeing the impact that our choices, our lives, and our actions and our attitudes have on others. That's when we start gaining wisdom into what we're doing. And I believe, in my opinion, is that those that start gaining wisdom become less selfish in what they do. Now, there are a few cases that do happen where people get a greater perspective and become jaded and have a poor view, but it's rare. Most people, as you gain wisdom, begin to start seeing the world, as we say, through God's eyes. And when we start doing that, we start seeing selfishness for what it is, and greed, it being a byproduct of that, for what it is and the harm that it causes. And so, yes, there has to be something that we do, and it comes down to choices. And what those choices look like vary for me and for a number of people that I know. That the first choice towards truly overcoming and becoming less selfish is that initial step in our faith, in our spiritual journey. And for me, it was accepting atonement for my sins, so that I am able to then have the power and understanding to not look at life selfishly. Because if it weren't for the grace that I was shown, where would I be? And it helps me as I make that choice and grow in it to see that we're all in that boat, in that we are selfish. And if we don't take steps to overcome it, we are likely to remain in that fashion. Welcome, Jane. Glad to have you with us today. Jane's got a commenter. There's so many books that I attribute to bringing back to God. It was a path I had to take, and I am thankful. You're so right. It is in the choices we make. And again, it is a challenge that we face, and we can have choices and learn principles. It is not absolutely necessary to walk in and experience faith to make good choices, but ultimately to truly overcome, to overcome and to live selflessly. There has to be a fundamental change in us, because left to our own devices, as Tom mentioned, we're going to behave selfishly, and which will quite often show up in the form of greed. And so for me, when I start acting from greed or being greedy, it makes me come back to look at myself and look at the principles and values that I know are true. And when I do, it helps me to then check my choices and change my choices at times to be able to live in a way that is really what is intended for us to start with. And thank you for the amen there, Aaron. I appreciate that. And then Eunice comments, your motivating force can help you live a balanced life. And Eunice, you're correct. And I know some people get tired of hearing me comment that first step in that is understanding our design. And our design, by the way, if you'll notice, I always show it capitalized. And the reason I show it capitalized is because our design is not by us. It is by our Creator. And that is a show of respect to our Creator. And once we begin to understand our design, who God has made us to be, which includes understanding the principles that are there, we begin to understand how to operate in motivating force. And when we couple it with our passion and our purpose, it becomes powerful for us and for others. And so, yes, our motivating force help us live a balanced life. And the key is to find the right motivating force. And for where I come from, our design, passion, and purpose is the core of that. And in order to find our truly defined, to find our design, passion, and purpose is initiated by the choice to get on a spiritual journey. And just such an important part because, and we've talked about that before, the balance part of life that we've talked about is not just physical. It's not just our soul, our mind, will, and emotions, but also our spirit. And our key to that balance is to nurture all areas. And the first step in helping to grow our spirit and to nurture it is the choice to receive faith and to, in faith, get a new life. And that life, again, for me, I can't speak to anyone else, but for me, that life came through atoning power of what Jesus Christ did back over 2,000 years ago. And so, again, my personal testimony, I hope I'm not putting anyone off by sharing it. If I am, I apologize for it, but not my intent. But nevertheless, it changed my life remarkably to a point that hence almost 50 years ago, I still remember it to this day, and it still impacts my life on a regular basis. Jane comments that we are the cause of the times we're in. COVID, for example, woke us up, but our reaction to it was and is entirely up to us. Sometimes I think God must be shaking his head, wondering why we keep living in fear unnecessarily. Why are more people not reaching out to help others? Our greed keeps us needy. Very insightful comment, Jane. Our greed does keep us needy. In addition to impacting others, it causes us to miss so much because key thing here is it is in selfish nature. It's where it's the source is selfishness. And yes, I agree wholeheartedly with the whole pandemic, and I try not to get too vocal at times because I know there are people that have a very different view than I do. But I think that the pandemic is all about fear and less about reality of what's going on. And it is so unwise to live in fear. And wow, again, this one takes us a lot of different directions, but I'm not talking about realizing and addressing fears, fear of falling off of something, or fear that because we've been robbed before, we then have a fear of being robbed again. Those are normal. Fear of getting burned if we touch fire. Those are normal. That's not what I'm talking about. The pervasive fear, this constant nagging fear we're being put in our current culture, current situation is so unhealthy. It is unwise, and we're seeing the result, and we will see the result of that for a lot of years to come, regardless of where we end up choosing. And so I agree with you. And sorry, I'll get off my soapbox there a little bit. And then Erin shares that, amen, that she feels grateful to have come to know Jesus at a young age and have continued to attempt to love others as he loved me. And indeed, Erin, the key that I continue to see is, wow, such grace shown to me, why would I not show it to others? And it affects and drives what I do. And as a result, by the way, rather than people focus on coming to faith and moral values as we lose a lot, I have not had anything I've lost that I, at now pretty senior in life, regret having given up, because what I've gotten in return is so much better and greater. So I appreciate your support in that. Zaid comments, control can be by fear, greed, micromanaging. Yeah, control comes in a lot of different ways. People that make those attempts to control us do so with quite a bit of cunning and insight that is scary. They learn how to find our particular button, whether it is fear, whether it's greed, whatever, and push those buttons to try to control us. So this topic of greed, I think we have a challenge in that when we talk about greed and being greedy, we think only in terms of people that are always after money, and that's it. And it's much broader than that. And as a result of not seeing it for what it is, we overlook greed in our own lives. And I know, again, for me, the idea of missing silver linings, and it occurs to me I need to explain, because not everyone knows the saying, silver linings means good things coming out of storms. And it has been a source of encouragement for many years, to at least here in the U.S. Hopefully it has become known enough that people aren't confused by my comment. But silver lining is the blessing behind the challenge or the hurt or whatever. But as Joshua commented in his post, could it be that our greed to have the gold, have only the best of the best, or what we think is the best, causing us to miss the silver lining, the blessing that is there? And because it doesn't meet some expectation, we miss it completely. And when we miss the silver lining, we become discouraged, we become hopeless. And what I look out in our societies today is a lot of hopelessness and discouragement. And one of the downsides to the fear we're living in is that that hopelessness and discouragement is driving us to a point where people are making harmful, unwise choices in a lot of ways, including the ultimate harmful, unwise choice of suicide. That is becoming a rise. It is becoming an unfortunate part of our culture, and so we just need to make sure, do some real internal working in terms of, do we have greed that is driving us? And it's certainly driven culturally for us, because one of the messages that our culture teaches us is we deserve everything. We deserve only the best. We deserve to have anything we want. And cultural messaging has affected a lot of us, and it is causing us to really have a tendency towards behaving with greed, even if it's not to the extreme of being that caricature in those images. And so I get it, but doesn't mean that there's not greed there. And the part of the key is that we need to recognize that it is there before we become greedy. And that's just like when we fail. If we don't recognize that we failed and why we fail, eventually we become a failure. And so I really hope and pray that we don't allow greed as part of our life to a point that we actually become greedy. Zaid, I understand I wish you the best. I know you're getting your day started. Thanks for joining in. Appreciate you being there. Karen, I'm glad that explanation on silver lining is helpful. Sometimes I have to remind myself that not everyone, because we have such a wide audience and it's worldwide, that sometimes I say things that people may not understand and could even be misinterpreted. And for that, I apologize that I've not been more aware and sensitive to that. That is a part of being selfless and wise to be aware of that. And so I need to continue to grow and learn myself in in wise behavior. So you can see I am not the holder of all wisdom by any means. I'm still learning and growing like everyone else. And so greed, I hope we will begin to think about it in our lives. Think about, by having wrong priorities and wrong expectations, is our greed leading us to lose out on what is really good for us and what we need to truly live. And I'm not talking about just getting along. Ultimately, and part of our design that's universal is that we're intended to live in an abundant fashion. And again, we have to be careful with words, because some people automatically want to interpret abundance as having every material thing you want. And that is not true. Abundance is living true to who we've been designed and what our purpose is, and living it. And the byproduct of that is contentment and joy. And that's where abundance comes in. And what's really remarkable is there are so many people seeking contentment, joy, peace, happiness, fulfillment. And what is unfortunate is they are being led to try to find those in the wrong places. And that's where I hope that part of this podcast helps us to get to, is the wisdom to see that chasing those things, that abundance through other means, is not successful. And all it does is frustrates us and causes us to be discouraged and to live in fear. And Gladstone, thanks for being here. I appreciate you taking time and being here on a regular basis now. And so, yes, let's consider greed, how much of it drives us, and understand that the source of greed ultimately gets down to being selfish. And to the problem with selfishness that we need to understand is it's not just harmful to others, but it's harmful to us, and really can factor in our lives in such a remarkable way. And thank you, everyone, for your kind words and comments along the way. I appreciate your presence, and I appreciate you sharing. Welcome, Somai. Glad to have you. We're kind of wrapping up. And I encourage you to, if you do nothing else, seek to gain wisdom. Wherever you do it, I really encourage you to do so, because wisdom is the greatest gain we can have. And in many ways, better than gold, better than money, better than things. And it leads us to be able to find that wisdom helps us to be able to find true abundance, living in the way that we are designed to live. And when we live there, it is quite remarkable, and it is the place that many of us are looking for in all the wrong places. So I encourage you, seek wisdom. Ultimately, if you seek wisdom, there's a promise that you'll find it. And the first wisdom for me was understanding that I cannot do what I do or am designed to do without taking a first choice of faith and overcoming, as Tom talked about, my tendency to do wrong, to sin. And once I took that step, then it opened up doors to more growth and to truly find wisdom, which then helps lead to abundance. So, thank you, everyone. We'll be back next Monday. Don't know the topic yet. God will lead in that. And I hope that you will invite others to join us and encourage them to participate, because it is y'all's input and your sharing that makes this podcast what it is. And we all learn and grow together along the way. By the way, I am I'm going to, in the near future, set a date for a Wisdom Seeker regulars Zoom gathering so that we can see each other in real time and share, be able to hear each other's voice beyond typing. And so be watching for that. If you're not one of our Wisdom Seeker regulars in our group on LinkedIn, put in the comments that you want to be, and I'll be happy to invite you into the group. And so thank you, everyone. God bless you. Hope that you find a new way to overcome greed in your life, and that way we can be an example to expose light into the greed of others, to hopefully help them learn without ever having to say a word, but just by living what we should. Thank you. God bless, and have an amazing week.